Good afternoon to all. It's very nice to be all gathered here and to see how many people are indeed interested to watch this key session, which is in the challenging world we are all living in, embedding culture at the core of policies and cooperation. So we have a very impressive panel, I must say, gathered to talk about that. First, Her Excellency Noura El-Kaabi, Minister of Culture and Youth of the United Arab Emirates, Youssou N'Dour, whom I'm sure everybody knows, so I won't present him, Ernesto Otone, who is Assistant Director General at UNESCO, and Mariko Silva, who is the President of the Luce Foundation. So, good afternoon once again to all of us. We have 45 minutes. I will begin with the first round with our speakers, 2, 3, 4 minutes each. And I would like to allow some time at the end, maybe 10 minutes, for Q&A from the audience, which once again is very large. So thank you to all of us. Her Excellency, Your Excellency, may allow me to begin with you. So you are Minister of Culture and Youth of the United Arab Emirates, and as you are our first speaker, I would like to first ask you about your definition of culture. This would be my first question to you. What does it encompass? How can it help to bridge gaps and to indeed allow for more cooperation between people, between cultures, between generations, between countries? And I also wanted you to tell us, what does it mean that youth has been added to your portfolio? Because I saw that you were first minister in charge of culture only. So if you can just begin by this, thank you very much, and I'll come up with some other questions.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, it's wonderful to be here at the Peace in Paris and at the Peace Forum and amongst my fellow panelists. Going back to your question in terms of what culture means to me, let's start first of all, in our culture, it's not inappropriate to give people my back. So I apologize for whomever is in my back. Going to the point of culture, and I think it's there's the definition of culture, but what it means to you as a person. And I think culture to us is a story, and it's an evolving and it's a moving story. It's a story, it's not about how I dress or what I eat. I think it has more depth than that. It's the value essence, it's the value system that you build within your culture, your identity. What is your language? What's the language of your ancestors? What are the tangible and intangible heritage? That is kind of a connection. That identity is not the past in terms of what we're thinking of. It can be the past, but it's also the present, and it's also the future of how I can link myself to who I am and how can I be connected to the world. Therefore, culture is a vibrant portal. It's a portal that helps us define ourselves, be unique, be original. And I think the most important thing is, in culture, I think the moment we understand the culture of another person is the moment that all walls just comes down from how different we are, from the different languages, the different color of skin, the religion. It all just falls out and we start connecting with one another. So I think culture is the connection. And going to your question with regards to the youth, can I answer it now or are we? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So youth was added into our portfolio 2 years ago. It was the Ministry of Culture and Knowledge Development, and it was specific to look into the culture portfolio. When youth was added, I have to say, the ministry started being more youthful. Definitely, all of us looked at the how this capitalized in terms of what we're doing. So I have a colleague as well. She's a Minister of Youth, Her Excellency Shamma Al-Mazroui, and she's also youthful. And I feel in everything we do, and I think that comes with the youth platform or youth portfolio. In everything we do, there's this connection. youth has to be part of it. They are the energy. They're the catalyst. They're they're the guarantor or the guardian of how it will look like in the future. Therefore, I think for us, youth is our duty is how can we have a youth that are more aware, that is responsible, that is accountable. And we're in a time where youth are very much, and not just youth, even us, we're very much glued to our digital platforms that is more dividing us than connecting us. Maybe we grew up with less platforms, digital platforms. My age, it encouraged us to be, working with one another, talking with one another, playing with one another, and maybe that was, a better time when there wasn't that much of a divide. Right now, there is that divide, and by having youth being part of it, because they're the ones who are experiencing it, how can they, just help us in making it of a less divide and a more more harmony when it comes to the discourse and discussions. I think youth is it's a topic that we can talk about it ourselves, but when youth are very much aware with their culture and their identity, it makes them better people and makes any person a better person. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I can see your point also about culture being transmission and youth being a key vector for that. We will come back later if we have time on this divide that you see, a potential divide that you see in digital, because this is also one of the main topics of our forum. And what are for you the best ways, apart from working with youth, to solve that? Well, thank you very much, Your Excellency. Youssou, so you are an artist, everybody knows you. Tu as aussi été ministre de la Culture
You are
du
also
Sénégal.
Minister of Culture in Senegal.
Vous venez de lancer cette semaine,
And
il y a
this
à
week,
peine 2 jours à Bruxelles,
you
la Fondation Youssou
launched
N'Dour
the
pour les industries
Foundation You
culturelles
Ndusu
et créatives.
for
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous
young
en dire
creative
un peu
youth. Can you
plus?
tell us a little bit
Pourquoi
more
avez-vous
about this?
lancé cette fondation?
Why did
Qu'est-ce que
you
vous
start
en
this
attendez?
foundation?
Quel est votre
What
objectif?
are your goals? What are you
Je crois
hoping
que ça
for?
nous intéressera tous.
I think that would be very interesting for all of us. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with all of you and to talk about this. We have to answer questions for you today, for employment. There are more conflicts still today, and we've seen that in creative, cultural industries, there's a lot that we can do for the youth in order to reach across borders, like Madame Labide just mentioned what she's doing. And it's very important to draw together all these different energies, and that would be very useful for Africa as well. And also to continue to carry out dialogues. Because what we're experiencing today in the digital space, to talk about this, we've created this foundation together in correlation. It's not just one singular organization that talks about Africa. It's an organization that speaks throughout the world. There are people from Africa and from the rest of the world as well. Thank you very much. Good luck to this foundation, which is brand new. And I hope that we'll see each other again next year in order to talk about how it's progressed. I had another question as well. Often we hear that people, that you as someone from Africa, a former Minister of Culture, the impact of culture in the digital sphere is a very important subject. Is digital an advantage, or is it contributing to grow inequalities?
I
think that digitalization has been an advantage, and it's also created a number of opportunities as well. And there are also a number of projects developing in digitalization that are being encouraged by the forum, by all these processes, in order to ensure that Africa can really benefit from all of these. Because I think that these opportunities for someone who comes from a village that's far away, who wants to participate in this world, this is something that didn't exist 20 years ago. So this is an opportunity for 70% less than 25 years old. This is very important for them. This is a major force majeure in culture as well, to continue to promote this dynamicism. I'm not very familiar with the United Arab Emirates, but I'm sure that there's also a similar dynamicism there as well. Thank you very much. Ernesto Tenier, you're the General Director for Culture at UNESCO. You are Chilean, and you are also a former manager of culture as well, and you worked in Paris and Berlin. So you're a real cultural citizen of the world. At the end of September in 2022, there was MONDIACULT held in Mexico, which was a large worldwide conference on culture and sustainable development. It's interesting to see the development between culture and sustainable development. Could you tell us a little bit more about this? The declaration was very rich, and you discuss a number of issues that are very important for all of us today, and how culture can also offer a response to this as well. I think that we'd all be interested to know a little bit more about this declaration. And maybe another question as well about digitalization. I saw that the declaration also underlined a worry as well, as far as digitalization might affect culture as well, impoverishment of diversity. Could you tell us a little bit more about this as well, and solutions that we need to offer for this? Because I think everyone has seen so far that digital and digitalization has a very large potential. So we all need to work together on this in order to benefit from this as much as possible. Thank you very much for bringing us together with friends here in this panel and idols as well. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. The MONDIACULT Culture, which just ended at the end of September of this year, first and foremost, was a meeting of 150 ministers for the first time after the pandemic. And it was the very first MONDIACULT since 1982 that defined culture amongst all of the ministers from 40 years ago. This doesn't mean that culture is not the same thing that it was 40 years ago, but it has changed because back then we had 72 cultural ministers in the world. Today we have more than 180. So all the countries of the world have an organization for this. For the United Nations, this is also one of the goals for the Agenda 2030. And it's also important to come up with what our goals are for this. Culture was not one of these goals. Following the pandemic and all these crises that we see in Europe, in Africa, and the Middle East, we see that culture needs to be identified as an objective in this agenda that we will be working on today. For after 2030. It's also important for us to ensure another thing as well. I'm not just talking about those in charge of culture, but also citizens, stakeholders, and we see that the youth also has a very strong voice as well in the civic space. And it's important to have a consensus, especially in this year where consensuses are very difficult, and this declaration was an example of that. It's stated to see culture as a goal beyond 2030, but also to identify it as a worldwide cultural good. Today, fundamental rights also include cultural rights. When we talk about access to cultural diversity, but also in order to have our own culture, to defend our culture, and this is a long-term, and languages as well. And languages are important also to transmit ideas, because everyone around us languages represent their certain values. So what was done in this declaration was to ensure access to these rights, to ensure that creators are paid correctly. And we see this especially following the pandemic, and also within the entire digital sphere as well, to ensure this, to ensure that people are paid correctly. Media and all media platforms also should participate more actively in sharing revenue, which is created through artistic creation, whether through technology, through content creation, or in communities where people meet. And we also spoke about the fact that culture is created through cultural diplomacy. Today, we've seen a number of great victories. For example, with the United Arab Emirates, the work that we're doing in Yemen, in Ukraine as well, has to be based upon cultural diversity, diplomacy. And this is within all of the fundamental declarations of human rights. So I think we have a new process here, where not only politicians, but also cultural stakeholders can play and must play a primordial role in order to ensure that culture is at the center of cultural development. So
vous citiez à plusieurs reprises le mot identité.
That you've used the word identity several times. To preserve and to allow everyone to express their cultural identities, and also to meet in dialogue. This is a real challenge. We're at the meeting at Sharm el-Sheikh. There were a number of no-action summits. In Mexico, was it difficult to come up with a consensus? Did you have the feeling that with over 100 ministers representing the countries that were together, that it was difficult to or easy to create a consensus on this? It's important to say 2 weeks ahead, we were in Indonesia for the G20 of culture, and it was impossible to come up with a declaration. We had worked on this declaration for 8 months, and it was especially important to have sub-regional, regional consultation to come up with a consensus. There are 2 important elements. One is that work began in December of the previous year. So the large conflicts that divide the world, especially in Europe, started up in the end of February. So there was a consensus to attempt to speak generally about these points and not to come up with very specific points, because these large points, whether climate change, social injustices, are constant. These haven't changed. So what was agreed upon amongst ministers was to come up with an agenda for 2030 that was based on the large issues that we have concerning culture and sustainable development. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for speaking to us on this.
Mariko Silva. Mariko, you are the president and the founder of the Henry Luce Foundation, which is more than 80 years old, if I understand. And it's a foundation that enables to enrich public discourse by, among others, fostering international understanding, which speaks a lot to what has already been said by our panelists. What role do you see culture can play in fostering this international understanding? I would like to ask you first. And then also, How does your organization approach supporting the arts to reflect your larger vision of social change? And then maybe a last one. I'm struck by the fact that, especially in the US philanthropic sector, but not only, there is a growing interest in a relatively new field which is called narrative change. Can you tell us a bit more about this and how you can see both happening, how it can be helped to, go in the right way? Thank you very much.
So maybe if it's okay, I'll go in reverse order.
Yeah,
Take your
absolutely.
last question first, which is to say that often, I think too often, at least in the United States, culture is considered to be extra. Arts and culture are considered to be extra. Maybe alien in France and other places, but in the United States it's true. So only, for example, in the Obama administration did the Bureau of Economic Analysis begin to count artists as their own economic category. And it turns out that arts and culture workers provide enormous economic boost in the United States. But if you don't count, you don't know. And you can't then integrate into economic policy. You can't then really effectively integrate into foreign policy. You can't then really effectively integrate into really imagining what the future might be. And to your last question about narrative change, from my perspective, yes, is about changing some of the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, but also who we can be. And arts and culture are the portal to expanding our collective imaginative capacity. Imagining not just better futures, but differences, alternatives, other ways of being and living. You mentioned languages. It's critically important. Yes, we fund the arts. We also fund language preservation, particularly in Native communities, small indigenous communities, both in Southeast Asia and in the US, because we believe that language contains insight, that culture contains insight. And for full human thriving, which is, I think, the goal that we all share, we need all those insights. No single culture has a lock, right, has a monopoly on what it is that we need to survive, let alone thrive. And the ways in which arts and culture, different perhaps media for different people, open up our minds to new possibilities that we couldn't consider on our own. We couldn't consider only by studying math and science, however important those may be, and they are very important. Even possibilities in math and science, technology, innovation, the future of the digital, all of those are inflected and informed by culture. And if we don't take account of that, then we are impoverishing our own collective future. And I wanted to say, too, that I really appreciate the emphasis that everyone has placed on youth. As a former college president, I always felt like when I was engaging with university students, I could a little bit see the future. Whether, as I said to someone earlier today, it was the sartorial future, the future of fashion, the future of arts, the future of culture, or the future of public policy and the hopes and dreams. I mean, as a younger person, your music helped me to envision a different future in which we could be more interconnected, in which we could have more exchange, not just in a kind of superficial way, but a deeper understanding of one another. And culture is the portal. Yeah. Culture is the portal for everything else that we want to do. The rest are instruments, but culture is the portal. And so when we invest in the arts, when we invest in languages, that's what we're investing in. It's a panoply of visions about the possible futures that we could create individually and together. So just to give one example, and if I may, one plug. We fund in the art space primarily visual arts, not only, but primarily, and primarily museum exhibitions. We funded recently at the New Museum in New York City an exhibition, a retrospective of an artist in her 90s, Faith Ringgold, a phenomenal African-American artist whose insights, as materialized in her visual arts work, brought new ways of thinking about and looking at American history and culture. And that show, I mention it because it's coming to the Picasso Museum in January. So for those of you who live in Paris, I would invite you to please visit that show. But investing in those whose visions of ourselves, our past, our future, our possible present, investing in those who see differently is a core element of what the Luce Foundation is committed to. Because we believe without that, we can't really realize the full potential for human thriving. And that goes for diplomacy too. Right? Whether we're talking about quote-unquote hard issues, hard power issues, security and so forth, arts and culture has something to say there too. Because if we approach those issues without a sense of hopeful imagination, well, we're destined to doom ourselves. And so there is an enormous realm of possibility that that kind of human connectivity can create.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Mariko. Before we turn to our audience, which I'm sure has questions, do any of you want to react to what anyone other has said? Yes, Ernesto.
If you allow me, it was mentioned culture many times, but today there is also education that is important. And if we don't try to put together both les deux sphères, ça va être très difficile. Et pour
If we don't
cela,
combine the two spheres, it's going to be very difficult.
nous sommes en train
And
de
that's why
travailler
today
sur
we
la
are
conférence
working
d'éducation et
on
culture
the
avec
Education
justement
and
les
Cultural
Émirats Unis, qui sont
conference
le pays qui
with
aujourd'hui est le
the
moteur.
UAE,
Donc la
who
conférence
have put
du
this
nouveau
together.
cadre sur éducation,
This is
culture,
going to be a
éducation
new
et
framework
patrimoine,
culture
éducation
to
artistique,
work
qui est en
on
train de se travailler
heritage,
avec
on
les États membres,
artistic,
va avoir une
cultural.
conférence pour pouvoir
This is
l'adopter
going to
en
be a
décembre de l'année
conference
prochaine. Et nous
to
croyons,
adopt
en
measures
tant qu'ex-ministre de la
in
Culture
next
aussi,
December.
que nous ne pouvons pas travailler
And
depuis
I'd
la
like to say that
culture au niveau
we
des politiques culturelles
can't just
si le ministère de
work
l'Éducation
on
n'est pas
culture
engagé.
if the
Parce que
ministers of cultures are
finalement,
not
celle qui va
engaged in
mettre
this
en œuvre
work.
tout ce qu'on est en train de discuter,
Because
comme
those
réseau et le ministère de
who
l'Éducation. Dans
will
tous les
put
pays.
everything into
Donc,
action
pour
are the
donner un
ministers of
exemple, les
culture.
États-Unis ne forment pas
For
partie
example, the
aujourd'hui
United
de
States
l'UNESCO.
are not members of
Cependant, les
of
États-Unis étaient
UNESCO.
présents à MONDIACULT en tant qu'observateurs.
Nonetheless, they
Et ça,
were
c'est
at
fondamental
MONDIACULT
parce que
as
pour
observers.
construire
And
quelque
that's very
chose, nous avons
important
besoin de
because
tous les pays.
in order to build something, we
Pour
need
qu'ils
all
soient tous à la
countries.
table
We
et
need
qu'on
everyone
soit
to come
tous
to the
porteurs
table,
des messages que
and
l'éducation et
we
la
need
culture
everyone
sont
to carry this
l'avenir
message
des jeunes.
for
Donc là,
education
j'ai mis
and
les trois
culture
piliers.
for the youth.
Jeunesse,
So
éducation et
both
culture.
youth, education, and culture are important.
Sincèrement que l'éducation ne pourra pas aller sans
I
la
think that
culture.
education is impossible without culture and vice versa. It's very important today
de mettre au milieu
to have this in the center,
entre l'éducation et
to have culture and education united together. And I also wanted to say something about singing. When we talk about peace, we have to ensure that people are respected. Now, we all have our cell phones. We have people, we have products. And in order to, when we think about paying correctly, these young people that represent their culture, this is very important. We need to work on this.
Your Excellency.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning education and the importance of it. And as Ernesto mentioned, the work we're doing with the UNESCO in terms of resolution that we submitted as the UAE in terms of arts and education, it was adopted unanimously. And I think that shows the importance. So therefore, going also to your point, if you don't count, you don't know. There's the educational aspect, and then after the education, there's the future of the youth. If they're in the creative industry or they're in culture. Okay, there's the job in culture or creative industries, but there's not necessarily to be that job. How can we start from an early age, the early childhood education, looking into the curricula itself, embedding culture in each aspect, in math and science and physics, and having it embedded there and having it part of, how we're softening and making individuals, each one have its own unique identity and originality and connection to the future. So this starts from an early age, and then you go to the age where there will be a future, there will be this college or university or what's next, and following that cycle and following what are the gaps and what is it, what do I have around me in the country, what are the sort of new jobs, as also I have another job in Zayed University. I worry about employability. Because they look into it, and we're in a time right now. They're self-employed or employed or maybe looking for a job, but it's also it's a challenge because you always need to stay relevant and disrupt the educational system. And therefore working very closely with the Ministry of Education, with institutions like the UNESCO, it brings us all on one table and taking those decisions. But they should be brave and bold decisions, because specifically in education, you can get everyone criticize education and pretend they know about education. But the moment they're in it, it's completely different ball game. After education, going to the point which I loved, if you don't count, you don't know, is the statistical framework that we adopted in the United Arab Emirates for the creative industries. That statistical framework, every year we're going to count and understand how creative industries is impacting the economy, because culture is not something nice to have. It's contributing to the GDP. It has its economic as well push and force, and how can we encourage that and have more of that. Therefore, the first statistical framework showed that creative industry contribute more than education and health in the UAE. This is what made individuals who are in finance or the Ministry of Economy saying, okay, you know what? This is truly important. And what is more important are the small and medium businesses, and the pinnacle of all of that are the freelancers. So how can I protect the freelancers as well in terms of what they're doing in those creative industries? So it's like a long journey of what we're trying to do. And soon we're going to host the Arts and Education with the UNESCO in the UAE, because at the end, culture is sharing, it's collaborating. There are differences, but how can we meet people and discuss those differences? How can we stop this practice of canceling the culture or boycotting certain individuals because they represent a certain flag or a certain nation? That is not their fault, So how can we make sure that this is as well a dialogue that we continue taking, even if it's a tough one? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mariko.
I'll only add 2 points really building on what you said. One of which is, one of the insights that I have found most revelatory in the work of the Luz Foundation and working with other foundations is the understanding that, of course, artists are the original freelancers, right? They're the original gig workers. And so as much as we talk about the gig economy and how we're going to support employment and how we're going to make the gig economy generative for everyone, artists actually already know, in many cases, some of the solutions, some of the ways in which we could organize ourselves from a public policy and economic policy point of view in order to support, yes, artists, but also the growing world of gig workers and freelance workers. Artists aren't the only ones with those insights, but they do have key insights. And so we've been looking to support conversations and opportunities to bring artists to the table with economic insights and really value that hard-earned knowledge. The other point that I wanted to pick up on that you raised is the importance of the relevancy of subject matter, particularly in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, for girls and women especially. And we know that the integration of arts and the integration of culture and cultural relevancy brings women and girls in earlier to science and technology, engineering, and math. There is ample evidence coming actually from, I don't know if every country, but certainly around the world and broadly. And so we ignore that at our peril. And so I hope that there is a infusion of arts and culture really across the educational system. When I was the president of Bennington College, this was one of our core commitments, and I absolutely think it's essential.
Thank you very much. Shall I now turn to see if there are questions in the... Yeah? Sorry.
Bonjour.
Can you just very quickly...
Yeah, very quick.
Thank you.
My name is Firas Shamsan. I'm a writer, journalist based in Bern, Switzerland, but actually I'm from Yemen. When I want to talk about art and culture as a journalist and writer from a country like Yemen, where we are facing many difficulties, you have the war, you have the radicalism and issues. The most important things is happening is the art and culture workers, they are very far, they are affected. If you are a writer or journalist, your work, as the minister said, as a freelance, it will be very how to protect. But with the war, you lose all the job. And then the most important right now, what we are facing like culture, it's considered not important. Like when someone sent humanitarian aid to Yemen, they will work for food and they work for many things. But if you want to do art and culture, this will be late. I will make it shortly, but we have an experience. We made it in Switzerland with many writers.
Fun, yeah.
We did. We write a book. We made a book. We collected to present Yemen. So we made Lilla Masad Dikra, Nusus al-Aswat Yemeniya. So this part of project, we made it as a human, like as an initiative, but we collect the money and send it to the orphans. So, but based on UNESCO and the jobs and that, it's hard to print some kind of books like that. It's hard to support and to continue and create. My point is like we need a strategy to support art and culture, because all the books, all things is present radicalism and hate speech. And this is really important in your hands as leaders or political leaders. We tried, but the real work is in your hands, and you should do.
Thank you. So it's a point, not a question.
Merci.
Okay, thank you very much. Here, can you please? Thank you. And who else? I'm looking at you, and this side.
My name is Carlos Carrasco, journalist from Bolivia. I would like to know the opinion of UNESCO representative about the impact that politics have against the expression of culture. For instance, due to the fact of the Ukrainian-Russian war, the ballet from Russia, musicians, etc., have been banned in Europe. They have been cancelled representations. And I would like to know if UNESCO should have a strong protest against this, because really we are 2 years without having a single Russian artist, either plastic, other musicians, other books are banned, Russian TV are banned, news agencies are banned, etc., etc. So I think UNESCO has to take a stand on that.
Okay, I think this is a question for you, Ernesto, if you want to take this one. Thank you.
Yes, as you can understand, an intergovernmental organization works for all these members. What we have is a convention that is called the 2005 Convention on Diversity of Cultural Expressions. And in this sense, we believe that, as I was mentioned before, we should ensure the freedom of expression of all artists around the world. And that's what we do in every country, even if it's Yemen or Iraq or it's Afghanistan, with women today that are in jeopardy with their freedom of expression and the right to go to schools. But we do the same. And I believe that today there is a big discussion on the matter that you mentioned, on what is happening with the Russian culture. What fault has Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Stravinsky in what is happening? It's absurd. We completely agree on this. And today we are discussing. At the same time, we have to ensure that the destruction of cultural heritage, that it's happening right now and that we are monitoring, can be stopped, because today we have more, the monitoring that we do is more than 207 monuments in Ukraine that has been destroyed. And when you destroyed one monument or one language disappears, even if it's indigenous language, it means that we are empowering our diversity of cultural expression. So we should stay for all these everywhere where we work.
Thank you, Ernesto. So you, and then you.
Thank you. My name is Sung Kyuhan Peter. I'm from South Korea, and I'm working at Jeju Peace Institute and Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity. So my question is to each panelist: how international institutions and higher education could present the common culture, and how could we, as global citizens, define and deliver common culture, especially to youth of minorities, not making other mistakes like the colonialism era? The reason why I'm asking this question is, while studying the history of religion at the university, I recognize that in the past, the word common culture was formed based on the imperialism. I personally interpret colonialism as a cohesive implementation of the West culture, on namely spreading the Christianity by structural violence, higher education, and science based on West point of view. So now in the present, while the world is globalized, namely the world has a common value based on a rule of law, democracy, human rights, and free market, I myself consider as a youth can observe the common culture, namely absence of common culture. So please.
Thank you very much. I think I'll take this question too next, and then we'll answer to this difficult question challenging.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais poser ma question en français.
I'm going to ask my question in French.
C'est très simple. Je pars d'un constat qui est posé par l'ONU.
I've
Que la
noticed
dimension
something
culturelle est
with
présente
the
dans 3/4 des
UNESCO
conflits
is
dans le
that
monde.
the cultural aspect is
3/4,
in
c'est pratiquement la
3/4 of
majorité.
conflicts in
90%
around the
des
world.
conflits, c'est vraiment la dimension culturelle
So
qui est
around
présente. Et je veux rebondir
90%
sur ce
of
qui a
these
été dit
conflicts,
par,
there is
notre ami
culture
Ernesto,
involved.
quand il a dit que la paix se construit
Now,
par la
Ernesto said
diplomatie culturelle.
that
La question est la suivante.
culture
La
can be
déclaration
defended
de
through
l'ONU sur la
cultural
protection et la promotion de la diversité
diplomacy.
culturelle pose la diversité culturelle comme un
And
impératif éthique.
It's
Est-ce qu'on n'est
seen
pas
as
aujourd'hui,
an ethical
est-ce
imperative.
que l'heure n'est pas arrivée pour passer à une évolution normative et
And
d'en faire un impératif, une
it's
norme
important
impérative,
to-
et non pas seulement une norme
to make this an
éthique,
imperative,
un impératif éthique,
to
en
ensure
faire
that
ce qu'on appelle en droit international la jus cogens.
to make a use
Monsieur Ernesto, pour,
Guggens out of this.
merci bien.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, pour répondre à ces deux questions très importantes, peut-être la première, effectivement.
We can answer these two
sur la
questions now.
diversité. Mariko, sorry. Are you happy to take this first one?
Sure, I'll
Thank
at
you.
least start and then invite others. I would say, first of all, it's a very important and complex question, and it relates to, I think, both the issues that were raised earlier about whether digitization flattens
Plus de questions.
culture,
C'est OK pour moi.
and also the ways in which digitization reaches new audiences and enables the engagement with a broad range of culture. And I think it's always a balance. I mean, you're from South Korea, so the BTS Army actually is a really good example of a kind of common culture or shared experience, because it's not just the music; it's also the experience of being part of that kind of inclusive community. I'm a little older than you, so I won't claim to know all the details, but that there is a kind of inclusive community there, and I think there's a possibility for people to participate in that and feel the enormous lift that comes from participating in that. As I said, when I was a young person listening to Yosu's music, I had an enormous lift listening to that, because it's a window into something else, but also something into which I can participate myself. And the participation part, I think, is incredibly important. And particularly after the pandemic and the need to gather and be together and experience that human connection. At the same time, making sure that there is culture coming from everywhere and that we are equally valuing all of the insights that are embedded. The indigenous language and indigenous arts and culture, which we also support in the United States, is a particularly good example of this. Right? So you mentioned colonialism, imperialism, the spread of Christianity. All of those things were certainly present and in some ways continue to be present in the decimation of Native American communities in the United States. And it's incredibly important for us to invest in their perpetuation on their own terms. And so I think there's a balance to be had there. And I would never say, for example, to a Native American youth that they shouldn't be part of the BTS Army too. So I think it's for each individual, each community, and we can be included in multiple ways. And our job as funders and policymakers is to seed the ground for all of that.
Yes, Your Excellency. Yeah.
Oui, moi je voulais juste rajouter que
I just wanted to add
effectivement c'est la différence des langues,
the differences in languages
des musiques,
and in music
des cultures,
and
c'est pas un
cultures
obstacle, c'est
is
plutôt une
not an
richesse.
obstacle, it's more
Je pense que
a source of
c'est ça
richness.
qui est à encourager
It's a source of
aujourd'hui.
wealth.
Et je pense qu'aussi, si
And
nous
this is something we have to
profitons
encourage
de
nowadays.
la situation aujourd'hui
And if we
numérique
use
avec
digitalization
cette
today,
nous pouvons
with
gagner
all
des
of
combats
this diversity, we
qui sont
can
devant nous, dans la-
overcome these
dans la paix
obstacles,
d'abord, pour avoir la
especially as far
La
as peace is
diversité
concerned.
est enrichissante.
And that's especially enriching.
I just want to add, in terms of a story about the UAE, we live in a country with people come from 200 different nationality. So for us, I mean, us Emiratis, we are the minority. So therefore, you have different schools, different languages, cultures. And we have very South Korean friends also in Abu Dhabi. When they would wear the kandora, we would feel wonderful about it, It's not about cultural appropriateness or whatever it is that is happening. No, it is how can we together, understand your background, your food, the different languages. And I think this is what happens for a relatively young country that is 50 years old. But it's got used to that kind of people from different backgrounds. And this is where it takes us right now, currently, with our public education system. This is why we're trying to look at it once again, and not just looking at the public schools, but even the wonderful private schools that come, whether it's the British or the American system or the Korean school or the Chinese or the Russian school. This is where there are certain elements of the culture of the UAE, of the Emiratis, that is very much unique as an Emirati, but it's inclusive. So because you're in the land, you want to know more about it. You want to know about it in school, and you want to embrace other cultures and nationalities at the same time. So there's maybe a new kind of a narrative or understanding or practice that is happening right now in a country that is 50 years old, which I will be more than happy to host you if you ever want to visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very quick word from Ernesto, and afterwards we will have to conclude, I'm told.
Seulement pour répondre à la deuxième question, comme ça je reviens pas sur la première, vous dire, et là je vais prendre une citation de notre directrice générale, Audrey Azoulay. Ça dépend comment vous voyez le verbe. C'est-à-dire, vous parlez de 3/4
You're talking about 3/4 of conflicts that are due to cultural issues. But I would say that 90% of conflicts that are solved through this cultural approach. And I'd like to give two examples so that we can finish on a nice note. We also have heard what our colleague here from South Korea said. These two examples are when we had the immaterial heritage 2 years ago that we subscribed. And then 1 year ago, we had, between the two Congos, we had this agreement as well that allowed them to approach each other to have a common element, or the couscous that unites Tunisia, Mauritania, all these different countries. So this is cultural diplomacy. It's important to see the glass half full and not half empty. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Ernesto. Thank you very much for this very optimistic conclusion. I mean, obviously, culture, it's about everything: identity, transmission, building together, diversity, unity. So thank you very much. And I think we can give a big round of applause to our panelists, which are great. Thank you very much to all.